Welcome to Murder, Mystery and Massacre, and today we are going to be looking at Penelope and David Jackson. So this case is looking at the murder of David Jackson, who was murdered on the 13th of February 2021, and this was following a row over bubble and squeak during a family meal. They had arranged a Zoom call with their daughter to celebrate Penelope's birthday, and they'd had a posh meal, but Penelope served up bubble and squeak, and this caused the couple to have an argument and fall out, and that is then leading on to then what happened. So obviously, before I get into the case, I'm just going to give you your content warning, because this case will be discussing issues of domestic violence. It looks at mental health. It looks at we talk about the injuries that were sustained, and we have the 999 call, and we also have the police cam footage as well. So if that's something that is upsetting to you or triggers you in any way, totally understand. Please do plug into the next podcast, and hopefully that one will be more suitable for you. So with all of my cases, as you know, I like to talk a bit about the background of the people that I'm talking about. So who is Penelope, and how did Penelope and David come together, and how did they meet, and what brought, how have they lived their lives, and how did they end up where they ended up? So Penelope, she was arrested on the 13th of February for David's murder, as we know, and she was aged 66, so she'd been with David for quite a long time, 24 years in fact, 28 years even, and they had been married 24, so a long time together, and they shared their daughter, although their daughter was fathered by someone else, which I will go into shortly. They lived in Germany, but they did come back to the UK, and they settled here. Penelope had a job as an accountant in the RAF, and she was 18 years old when she first got married. So going all the way back, she had her first two daughters with her first husband, and it was after the children were born that she then reported that she was experienced domestic violence with her first husband. So she escaped, which is quite brave at that time, in that era, because a lot of the times it was kind of, if you got married, you put up, you shut up, and you kind of got on with that. Most people didn't. It was frowned upon, to separate and get a divorce, but she was being mistreated, and she found the strength, and she left that marriage. So she then remarried her second husband. Unfortunately, that marriage came to an end because her second husband came out as gay. And again, back in that era of time, being gay was frowned upon. So a lot of gay men, they would enter into marriages with women. They would go and have children with women, but as times progressed and it was becoming more acceptable, a lot of the men were, coming out and divorcing their wives, because they were then becoming true to themselves and then living the lives they wanted to. So again, that was her second marriage, and it was just so unfortunate for her. But she goes on, and she then meets her third husband, and it's with her third husband that she is pregnant with her third daughter. And unfortunately, during this marriage is when she came into contact with David, and they started an affair. So obviously this was quite hard for her husband, and this ended up leading to him committing suicide. So he took his own life. He was sadly successful with taking his own life, and Penelope was still pregnant with her daughter Isabel, and David took Isabel on as his own. He raised her as his own daughter from a baby, and she, that's all she ever knew was her dad, and he did later officially adopt her also. So David, he had been married twice before, and he was 78 when he was murdered, and he had 2 daughters and a son from his first marriage, and his son was married and was expecting a baby with his wife. And this ties in, and I think it has an effect on what happened here, because his son had an affair, and then he attempted suicide, and sadly he was successful, and he left a note for his dad to say he didn't want to end up being like him. So to be left a note like that from your son must have had some kind of impact on him and his mental health, whether or not he was aware of that, if he was aware of that, but it will have had some impact on him, because it's essentially saying, you know, I've killed myself because I don't want to be like you. It's kind of a blame. So then he obviously then met Penelope, and they both come from very different sort of situations, you know, and Penelope's had several marriages and he's had a previous marriage, and then there's the issue with Penelope's ex-husband killing himself, and then David's son. So they're things that are going to be on people's minds, you know, they're going to affect them, even if they're not aware. It will be niggling at them, and it will be something that, you know, when you're in the heat of something, that kind of thing would come up, potentially, because, you know, if you start to aggravate each other and get on each other's nerves, you know, feelings start to change, and then you start to just, you know, you can throw out some hateful stuff when you are in an argument. But again, these are the incidences that are emotional, and they can take their toll on a person. So as we know, their marriage became quite volatile because of this, because of the call that you'll hear, and you'll see the cam footage. You will see that Penelope says that within their marriage, her and David, that she was also subject to domestic violence with him. And it's just, I can kind of see how they could end up where they have ended up, but she says it was for pretty much the entire relationship. And I struggle with that, because she obviously got out of her first relationship. She knew the signs, and because of it, she left that marriage. So I can see that she had the strength to do it before, and she could have the strength to do it again. The question is, why didn't she? So as I mentioned, on the 13th of February 2021, they had their meal with their daughter Isabel and their son-in-law, and they were celebrating her birthday, and the evening had been going well until they had the row over the bubble and squeak. And this was because David didn't feel that it was an appropriate dish, because they had lobster, and he just didn't feel it was the right dish, and he felt embarrassed, and that she did it on purpose to embarrass him. So they kind of thought that her daughter and son-in-law thought, you know, that everything was okay. And then later that evening, Penelope sent her daughter a message saying, you know, if this all goes tits, you've got this, and no, I love you. And with that, she rang her mum, and thank goodness she did call her mum, because I think if she hadn't have called her mum when she did, that would have lived with her forever, because it was a cry for help from Penelope. But anyway, she calls her mum, and Penelope says, no, everything is fine. So she kind of chalks it down to, okay, so they had a fight and a little bit tense, and now they're okay. So she left it there. And obviously she went to bed, and Penelope went to bed, and I just feel that very much so that because she's done this, she can, even though she'll still feel awful, if she hadn't have rung, that would have stuck with her. So in that night, they both, David and Penelope, sleep in separate bedrooms, and Penelope goes to David's bedroom to speak with him. And I'm not being funny. If someone came to me in the middle of the night and I was asleep wanting an apology, they're not going to get one. So he won't have been in the right frame of mind from the argument, and certainly to be woken up having someone looking for an apology that's just not a good combination. But she did, and she told him that she couldn't do this anymore, that she'd had enough, and because of the claims of domestic violence and the emotional abuse, which she said he was emotionally abusive, he was coercively abusive, and he was violent. She said that evening she'd planned to actually slit her wrist and end her life. And David replied to her, so just get on with it then. Not the apology she was looking for. And so that led her to then think, why should this be me? Why should I take my life? I'm going to take your life. And she said David was laying in the bed, and she said he goaded her on to stab her, saying she wouldn't do it. And as we know, when this incident occurred, we were in the height of our lockdown, and lockdowns have had a tremendous effect on domestic violence. It's increased massively, and you're stuck with those people 24/7. You're not able to go out. It was really tough on a lot of people, and that normally in a situation there'd be some form of escape, but during lockdown there wasn't, and also it's created more domestic violence and hostile environments at home, and it was for them. On average, 1.6 million women and 755,000 men experienced domestic violence between March 2019 and March 2020, and this has continued to rise. So Penelope stabs David, and that leads for him to call the emergency services, and he tells them that he's been stabbed. Not only did she stab him once, she stabbed him again. She stabbed him twice more, and he was on the phone talking to the emergency services, and he was heard actually when she took over the phone call. He was heard for the in the background, crying out in pain. So she takes the call over, and I'm going to put that call here for you now so that you can listen to it, and it is unbelievable. If it wasn't a true story and this was attached to a comedy, it would be amusing, but it's not. It's real life. This happened, and her response and remorse is just so cold. And no matter what their situation, that's not the way to deal with it in the way that she did. So here is that 999 call. Have a listen, and then I will pick up and we will continue.
Might just go and stab him again, but...
Alright, do not stab him again.
Why?
Okay, so just listen to my voice. Okay?
Yes.
Stay on the line with me.
I am compartmented.
Okay, are you with the patient now?
Well, I'm in the lounge and he's in the kitchen bleeding to death with any luck.
Alright, so just stay on the line with me.
Look, this is not... You're not paid enough to do with this. It's not fair.
Okay, well, ultimately, madam, I'm listening to your voice, and you're the help I have available, so we need to help him, okay?
No, I'm not.
All right, madam,
I don't
how many times have you stabbed him?
I did the once.
You did the once?
And then he said I wouldn't do it again, so I did it twice more.
So, okay. So, in total, how many times?
3 times.
3 times, okay.
Once I thought I'd get his heart. Well, he hasn't got one. And then twice in the abdomen,
So, that was the 999 call. She says she's killed her husband, and she's done it because she's had enough. And during this call, she says to the handler, you hear her say, he's bleeding to death with any luck. And I couldn't believe my ears when I heard that. And I don't think it's something that I'll ever forget in terms of cases, because the way that she spoke about David was awful. So this call to 999 lasts for 18 minutes, and during this time, Penelope refuses to help give David life-saving treatment. She tells the guy on the phone, you're not paid enough to deal with this. This is not fair. And he's trying to help get her to go and help him, but she doesn't, and she refuses. So unfortunately, David is thought to have heard all of that, and he will have been alive for the most of that 18-minute call. So the police do arrive, and Penelope tells them that her husband is in the kitchen and he is on the floor. And whilst talking to the police, she asks for her coat, and she does this several times. She's cold, and there's something about the fact that she's focusing on this coat, because there is her husband laying on the floor, potentially dead, deceased, and she's done that, but she's cold and she wants her coat. And that could be because she's in shock. It could be that she's genuinely meaning what she's feeling, and she's thinking of herself now, and she's cold, she needs her coat. And it just brought up several times, and I just find that interesting, because obviously she was in her pyjamas, and she has been known as the pyjama killer in the headlines. So, but you can see she's just concerned with herself right now, and that she's cold, and not the fact that David is on the floor, and you can hear from the call she's got no intention of wanting him to come out of this alive. So that was just of an interest to me. So I'm going to pop the footage here for you of the police camera from their uniforms that they wear, and it is quite a good thing that they do this now, because it gives us an insight into what happens, and they often release it into the public domain so that we can see it. And again, mind-blowing when you see her response to the police, and she doesn't think about what she's saying, and you can hear the police advising her to stop talking, and she doesn't. And just the things, cold, callous things that she says about what she's done and why she's done it, you can't believe it when you hear it. I certainly couldn't. And again, this footage and some of the things that she says sticks in my mind. So here is that video.
Hello, madam. Do you want to just step outside for me a minute? Can you come outside?
Yes.
Thank you.
He's on the kitchen floor.
Okay, at this moment in time, okay, if you just listen to my colleague, under arrest suspicion of attempt murder, mate.
Under arrest with suspicion of attempt murder. You do not have to say anything. It may harm your defence. You do not mention when questioned anything you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Might go in and see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Could I get my coat?
Just bear with me 2 seconds.
In there. I admit it all.
Alright.
Just get them. Alright, I want to go in. Alright.
No,
So-
he's on the kitchen floor.
Can someone just stay with Devon while I go in?
There's nothing nasty, and I'm certainly not. My coat's in the.
Yeah, just
Ouch,
wait
it's
2
a bit
seconds.
hot.
Alright, you okay? You alright?
With any luck, you'll be too late.
We'll get you
Right, get the ambulance in. Pronto, we need
Oh,
CPR.
don't. No, please don't.
Yeah, we need the
I should
ambulance
have
in.
stabbed him a bit
CPR.
more.
We've got CPR.
Yes, I stabbed him once. Because he's a.
No, I'm going to send them on out.
He's an aggressive bully and nasty, and I've had enough. And when he said you wouldn't do it, I did it twice more.
Penelope, my advice is don't talk about it now, okay?
No, I have no intention of not agreeing to what I've done.
Okay.
I know what I've done.
All right.
And I know why I've done it. And if I haven't done it properly, I'm really annoyed.
I'm further arresting you for murder.
Oh, good.
I've already cautioned you,
Yes.
so your necessities for your arrest is for a prompt and effective investigation
Yeah.
and stop further harm.
Sorry, that one's a bit tight.
So,
This
Penny,
one's all right.
We're gonna
We're going to move them to the
rear
rear
in
in
a
a
minute.
moment.
The DO's just come out to check your temperature, and then we'll move you in. And then
Mind
we'll
your head. All right.
I'm not
Do you want her out?
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Step out. Mind your head.
Yeah. Rightio. I'm very sorry for being a nuisance.
No, I've just got to take a temperature, okay?
Yeah. Oh, that'd be just really great. Get COVID on the top of this.
So following on from that video, we know that Penelope is then arrested and then she is taken to the police station. She also leaves a handwritten note, which is just up there above, so you can see that. And in this she confesses in this handwritten letter, which is brought up in the statement from the judge, which I will read at the end. And she confesses to what she's done. And we know that from hearing Penelope, you know, she's saying she's had enough, she's been abused emotionally, physically, she couldn't cope any longer. And she'd also had that first relationship of domestic violence as well. And then again, like I said before, those other things come into play, like her third husband committing suicide. That's going to affect people's thinking, whether they believe it or not. Like, it's going to affect them. And you know, there could be, I mean, I don't know, but because I don't know the couple, I don't know them, but there could have been an element of like, well, he killed himself because we got together, and that's just been in there and come out. I don't know. It's just a thought that you know, when I'm thinking about how they get where they get, that's one of the things that these things play on the minds. And obviously, if he's being abusive with her, you know, he's lost his son, and that is going to have an impact on his mental health, and there could be blame there, and he might edge that towards Penelope. Again, I don't know that as a fact, it's just something that I've been thinking about as to why he might have acted the way that he did, because obviously when they got together initially, their relationship must have been good, because they went on to get married. And from the character of Penelope, I wouldn't think she would marry someone if they were being violent from the start. I don't know, but I would think with her having the strength to leave her previous marriage, she wouldn't go there again. But you know, we did end up, you know, with David being murdered. And interestingly, when talking to members of the family, Penelope's daughter Isabel does remember seeing 3 incidences of serious aggression when they were living in Germany before they moved back. And she said she'd witnessed her mum being pushed into a wall, she saw her mum have a bloody nose, and she also saw an incident where a knife was pulled. And David apparently told his daughter also, this is obviously etched in her mind, to get the mug that she'd given her mum for Mother's Day, and he smashed it in front of her as well. But Jane, his other daughter, she claims that Penelope enjoyed, you know, goading him on, and she was the abusive one in that relationship. But David's brother, he says David goaded her, and that it was him. But David's ex-wife says that David was actually scared of Penelope. So you've got different people's perspectives of their relationship, and it's unusual, like for a family member to say, you know, he was the one goading her in the relationship, but he actually says that it's him. But then his ex-wife is saying it's her, and then you've got obviously what his daughter's witnessed happen as well. So different perspectives on what's happened, but clearly people have seen this, but not, you know, just haven't really kind of gone with it. And perhaps maybe when they say they saw them goading, they kind of just thought that was where it was like left, you know, that they didn't, you know, actually get physically violent. And a lot of people don't think about the emotional abuse side of it, but, you know, depending on what they're saying and doing to each other, can have some, you know, dramatic effects on their long-term mental health. So obviously we know she's arrested and the case goes to trial, and Penelope is sentenced to 18 years. Now, she is currently appealing that decision because she wanted to have her case tried and obviously be convicted of manslaughter, which would come with a lesser sentence, but she was found guilty of murder, and she had 18 years minus the time that she'd already spent serving in prison. So she will be obviously appealing the decision on this. So when we get that update, I will come in and do another live to talk about obviously what's happened and where, if anything changes in a sentence, if it's lessened. But you have to remember, you know, she was found guilty of murder, and it was said to be 10 jurors to 2, so it was unanimous, and the jury only took 10 hours to come up with their verdict, so very quickly as well. And after I have read the sentence and statement from the judge, I will also read a piece that Penelope's daughter had written about how she felt, because obviously for her, like I said, you know, that's both of her parents. In a sense, she's lost both of them. She's lost her dad and she's lost her mum, and that has got to be devastating for her, because she only ever loved David as a dad. Like, he was the only dad she knows, and her mum's gone and done this, and it's not her mum. And she has the impact statement, and I'll read that to you so you can kind of see where her feelings were. But as I said, once we know what the appeal brings, we can bring that back up and we can discuss it. But I would be interested, obviously, to you know, after this, find out what people's views are. But it's just so upsetting, and there's so many things that are so wrong in this case, and just Penelope's reaction. You know, and we know throughout the whole entire time that she was on the call and she was being arrested, she said she was compos mentis, and she knew what she was doing and why she was doing it. So I don't know why she then thought maybe she would get offered manslaughter charges, but she wasn't. She was convicted of murder. So here we have the judge's statement from the trial. We also have Penelope's daughter's impact statement, victim impact statement, and the statement from the Centre of Women's Justice. So this is the final statement from the judge at the court, and he says, David Jackson was 78 years when you murdered him. He was kind, gentle and a caring man. He was a loving father and a grandfather who'd battled through some serious illnesses. And these serious illnesses, there was one occasion where that he'd got some electronic device and it wasn't working properly, and he actually had episodes of violent behaviour, and he went and got help for that. So is that something that could have been a factor again? Like, could the device that he had malfunction, but he just didn't get the help this time? But it was said that his behaviour actually improved as a result of getting the problem fixed. So, you know, before he was previously, you know, prepared to try and get things sorted and make things work. So he was on his well-earned retirement. He'd spent many years serving his country in the armed forces. He had plans for the year ahead, and no doubt plans for well beyond. You know, they both loved to travel. They had a nice life. They could have had a nice life, or they could have separated and still had a nice life. All that was brought to an end on the 13th of February when you chose to stab him to death. That was a vindictive and cruel act on your part. I have no doubt whatsoever you wrote the confession note in advance of inflicting that first wound to his chest. I have no doubt you were aiming for his heart. As he was on the telephone speaking to 999, you stabbed him twice more. You chose to stab him in the abdomen because you wanted to ensure that he would die. The confession that you wrote was composed in anticipation of achieving that end. I have no doubt that you intended to kill your husband and that it was premeditated, and that is your own confession. And actually, with the incident on the phone, and she says that he was goading her to stab him. But actually, the 999 call handler reports that he was screaming in agony, and that it wouldn't be possible for him to have been going, "Oh, you haven't done it properly," and then she stabs him twice more, because he was in absolute agony. I don't think that he would have been looking for her to have done it the right way before. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So I tend to agree that she just did it, because if he was screaming in agony, he wouldn't have goaded her. He wouldn't have been able to. So your own confession recognises the fact, as suggested, that there was some premeditation or self-defence, and he says your actions had nothing to do with the latter concept. Having inflicted fatal injuries, you spent 18 minutes talking to the emergency services, which we touched on, during which time you refused their pleas to go and help David Jackson. And he was alive for most of that 18-minute period, and he will have heard what you were saying. And at one stage, in response to an inquiry as to whether he was still alert, you were mocking him. And continued to mock him with no thought at all of helping him. During your 4 days giving evidence, I did not detect a shred of genuine remorse on your part for the terrible crime that you committed. I have heard a moving victim personal testimony that underlines the enormous damage that you have done. The loss to those who love David Jackson is deep and irreparable. The evidence from Isabel Potterton exemplifies the conflict those who care for you feel in the context of the loss that you have caused them, and the sentence that I have to impose can do nothing to bring an end to their grieving. Your age, good character and lifetime of service has an accountant of the Ministry of Defence, and I take this into full account. The sentence for murder is life imprisonment, and I have to set a minimum term applying Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Code, and the starting point of reference is 15 years. The aggravating features that I've outlined require a significant upward movement, but that must be tempered to a degree to reflect the available mitigation. So in my judgment, the minimum term that you must serve in prison is 18 years, less the days you've spent already, which is 256 days. That term represents the minimum period you'll be required to serve after it is served, and there is no guarantee that you'll be released at any time or any time after. It will then be for the parole board to decide if you are fit to be released, and you must also understand that if and when you are released, you will remain the subject to licence for the rest of your life, and you may therefore be liable to be recalled. And the statutory surcharge will be added to the record. So after the verdict, Mr. and Mrs. Jackson's daughter, Isabel, released the following statement, and she said, "On the 13th of February, my whole world fell to my feet. From the moment the police knocked on the door and told us what had happened, not only had I lost my dad, but I've lost my mum too. My life was changed forever. I have dealt with the looks of pity and people contacting for the gossip. I have dealt with people asking me inappropriate questions, and I've done all of this because I've had to. I've had to be strong for Dad, and I have to be strong for Mum. I have lost the man that I looked up to and loved, and I've lost the man that I was always there for me no matter what. The man that came and fixed my things in my house, which I didn't know even needed fixing. The man that could make me laugh. But I feel I've also lost my mum. I've lost the woman who always knew how to make me feel better. The woman who was my friend, my champion and my support. The woman who cared, cherished and loved me. Yes, I know mum is here, but she's not the same person I knew, and I don't know what the future holds. But I do know the relationship I once cherished with my mum will never be built back to what it was. However, I love them both. I always have and I always will. I would finally like to thank family and friends who have supported us over the past 8 months, especially my husband, who has been my rock, and I don't believe will ever come to terms with what has happened, but would sincerely ask for our privacy and be respected as we seek to move forward with our lives. So that's quite a moving statement from her daughter. So as you can see, the judge has given his reasons, and he has doubts on some of her defence that she's brought to the table, and he points out that she was careless and she mocked David, and we see that in the video that I showed you. There was no remorse. There was not one point when she said, actually, I need to step back here and I need to go and help him. Actually, what I've done is wrong. There isn't that there. And then that remorse comes a bit later on. But even still, we know in the video she was like, I'm compos mentis. I know I've done it and I know why. And then, she says there's that bit of remorse that she loved him. And the judge doubts that. So she's got 18 years. So do you, now we're wrapping this case up, do you think this is appropriate? Do you think 18 years is harsh for a 67-year-old lady that's previously been of good character, no criminal records, and has a history of domestic violence and has had claiming to have had the violence within this relationship? Because I'm looking at this and I think there's people done far worse. Interestingly, the Centre for Women's Justice also made a comment after the verdict and the sentence, and they said that they are horrified that Penelope Jackson has been convicted of murder by a 10-2 majority verdict, and obviously getting the sentence of 18 years at Bristol Crown Court. As the evidence has revealed, Penelope was a victim of sustained coercive control in her 28-year relationship with the deceased. Evidence was heard before the court, and I'd forgotten about this, but he'd also insisted that she'd got a tattoo on her bottom saying that she was the property of the deceased, to stop him being jealous and possessive. And like most victims of coercive control, she didn't see that she was the victim until the offence, when she escaped his abuse and control. And this is a classic case of slow build-up fear and anger arising from controlling behaviour, which becomes more unbearable because she became trapped with him during lockdown, which we touched on, and how lockdown has affected domestic abuse cases and abuse to children. It's inevitable. People are stuck with that person, and for her it led her to lose complete control and stab the man she'd been married to, and obviously the father of her daughter. And they point out, like we said, her age is 66, she's of good character, she won't be released or eligible to be released until she's 84, and although there's nothing else to suggest that she represents a risk to anyone else. As you can see, the judge has made his statement, and you can see why he's given the sentences that he's given. You can see the Centre for Women's Justice. You have their opinion on the matter, and they're also, helping. They're going to fight the cause for the appeal. And then obviously Isabel's statement regarding her parents, which is really, really sad. And I just hope that, you know, she can find her way, and not having her parents with her. Obviously, she still loves her mum. And I don't know, I think there may, you know, potentially there'll be some relationship there, but she's not the mum that she knew. I hope you found this case interesting. As with all the cases, you know, there is no intention to offend or upset anyone involved with the case. It's just information that I have sourced from the internet, just to, you know, for research purposes and discussion, as a video to load on my channel. So I hope you all have a great day. Bye.